.30 back on the Sports Fix. You're listening to North Central Florida sports leader, ESPN Radio and ESPNGo1.com. Adam Reardon, Chris Doering, Scott Brantley with you. We jump back into recruiting with 2 feet. We're going to do that down in South Florida. We'll talk Miami Hurricane recruiting with Danny Money of CanesInSight.com. Danny, good morning. How are you, my man?
Doing great. How you guys doing?
Doing well. Now, as we sit up here in SEC country, when you talk recruiting, everything's hunky-dory. Florida finishes with the second recruiting class in the country behind Alabama. Everybody else making these great pushes. I would say that for Miami, though their recruiting class, if you base it on star ranking averages, was pretty good, the finish yesterday was certainly not what Miami Hurricane fans were expecting. How disappointing was the finish for Al Golden and company there at Miami?
Well, really, it was the period from 8 a.m. to about 9:45 a.m. where UM fans were heading to the closest bridge, starting with J.R. Bostwick from the University of Florida. I thought that was a very quiet recruitment. He's a quiet kid, quiet announcement about it was kind of under the radar. Really, really hurt the Canes. They're desperate for defensive line help. This guy fit the bill with his size. He's about 6'3", 6'4", very well built. Not a fat kid, pretty much exactly what they needed on their defensive line. And they looked throughout the process, had some family ties with him. So to lose him to the Gators at 8 a.m. really hurt them. And then, obviously, at 9:15, Matthew Thomas, who in my opinion is as good as any defensive player in the country, from Miami, Booker T. Washington, committing to FSU on national TV, that was a really tough blow. So, that period really hurt Miami. They recovered well later in the day, and overall, it's kind of the stages of grief. We're in the acceptance stage and are happy with the kids that we have now, but certainly, that was a big blow yesterday morning.
Now, obviously, it's a smaller class with 16 signees, and you did miss out on a couple guys that you would have liked to have on your wish list. But how much of that was intentional, given the fact that you look at 2014's potential class from that South Florida area? A lot of people think that may be the best class that they've had down there in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, well, Coach Gold was actually on the radio this morning talking about how much they had a self-imposed cap, not so much because of how good 2014 was, but because of the potential sanctions. And even though everybody's very optimistic about how that's going to turn out and what Miami's already done, he wasn't in a position to oversign. So, he wants to be prepared in case there are some scholarship reductions to deal with it quickly, so that he couldn't take the risk of oversigning. Now, obviously, if Matthew Thomas wanted to come, or J.R. Bostwick wanted to come, or Keith Bryant wanted to come, they would have found room for those guys. But, there was sort of a self-imposed cap. Now, as far as 2014, that really is shaping up to be a special year. And, I've seen these kids, and I haven't been around the country to see everybody else, but having been around here for a long time, I can't imagine that there's two better running backs in America than Sony Michel from American Heritage and Dalvin Cook from Miami Central. Casey McDermott from Palm Beach, probably the best offensive lineman in the country, or at least he'll be ranked in the top 2 or 3. And then Erman Lane, wide receiver from Homestead. This guy, a lot of people, Jay Green, 6'4", 4.4 speed, was the top receiver down here in Miami-Dade County last year. So a lot of promising talent on the horizon that has ties to the Canes, but in the short term, they're appreciating the kids that they did sign, and looking forward to getting this investigation finally behind them.
Danny, I know with Michael Barrow on the staff and good recruiter, when you miss out on a guy like Matthew Thomas, but then you sign 2 guys. I know they went out to California to get the Devontae Bond kid, and then another kid from I think up in Virginia. Where do they stand from the linebackers position right now as far as depth? I know Perryman will be a leader on that defense. He comes back with a couple other guys, but how does that unfold the linebacker position?
Well, Denzel Perryman, like you mentioned, comes back. He was hurt last year for a lot. He struggled with an ankle injury, struggled with some lingering injuries, but when he was on the field, he was everything that the Canes expected him to be. So he's a potential All-American type if he stays healthy throughout the year. The real wild card as far as the linebacker position is Eddie Johnson. He was a redshirt freshman last year, freshman All-America, 6'2", 240 pounds, runs about a 4.6. and really plays with a ton of intensity, a ton of passion, really plays like a crazy person on the field, probably has the best motor on the team. Unfortunately, that kind of carries over off the field, and he's had some personal concerns and academic issues. So the concern is that he might not be here next year. He's still here now, but that's certainly a situation to monitor. And if he were to go, depth would become a bigger issue. You mentioned Devontae Bond. He's going to bring a pass rush element. That's really his specialty, very much a quick twitch player, high motor. He'll be a stand-up rusher on third down. He could be a factor. And yesterday they signed Jermaine Grace out of Miramar, who is a different type of linebacker than a Matthew Thomas. He's kind of built like a Sean Spence or a Levante David from Nebraska, and now with the Tampa Bay Bucks, a great rookie season for him. He's a weak side linebacker, about 215 pounds, extremely coordinated, very fast, really excels in coverage. So he can contribute on passing downs, not necessarily as a rusher, but as someone who can cover. So the linebacker position, as it stands now, is in pretty good shape, but very dependent on what happens with Eddie Johnson. And actually, before I could get off the linebackers, you mentioned Alex Figueroa from Virginia. That's a guy who I think is probably my favorite player in the class as far as being a sleeper. Very physical kid, very talented, kind of slipped under the radar because of grades coming out. But we got him out of prep school, and I think he can be a really, really special player.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.com. Our guest talking Miami Hurricane football recruiting the day after National Signing Day. Obviously, the relationship between Al Golden, Ice Harris at Booker T. Washington, Luther Campbell, who's on, I believe, Northwestern staff at this time now, then there might seems a bit strained. Any truth to the thought or the prevailing thought down there that some of the South Florida high school coaches are essentially poisoning the well?
Yeah, well, the story when Coach Golden first got here was that Randy Shannon had poisoned the well and that he was doing a great job in repairing those relationships. So, it's kind of the same old story. I think with these coaches, they always want their kids to be recruited, as they should. So when their kids are recruited, they're going to be upset, and that's just going to be any coach. A lot of these Dade County kids don't have the grades to play at the University of Miami, so that's kind of been a constant issue with some of these kids that don't get recruited. And then there's some kids that just aren't as high on their board and don't get recruited. There's always going to be that kind of backlash from the coaches that feel jilted. It was the same thing when Randy Shannon was here. I think Coach Golden put a huge emphasis on the inner city. He's run camps that are far less expensive than what Randy Shannon was running to allow more people to attend the camps. Really put a full court press on Matthew Thomas. You couldn't have recruited anybody any harder than this staff did. They sent about 3 people to a state championship game. We're always in the school. They really put a huge emphasis on getting him. So I think that's overblown. As far as Luther Campbell, he's a defensive coordinator at Miami Northwestern. Artie Burns, the best player on Miami Northwestern, is going to be a Cane next year, signed yesterday. Miami's probably going to get in the mix for his defensive end in 2014, Michael Smith. So I do think it's a lot of noise, more so than anything tangible.
One of the weirder stories of the day across the country had something to do with the Hurricanes, and that was their former commit running back Alex Collins out of South Plantation. The story about his mom taking the letter of intent, refusing to sign it with him wanting to go to Arkansas. Evidently was resolved with him saying he's sticking with his commit, but yet I haven't seen an update with that letter of intent actually being faxed or received from Arkansas. Is there still some wavering in the family not being on the same page as he mentioned yesterday?
Well, the story last night was that he was going to sign his letter of intent today at 11 a.m. It just came out a couple minutes ago that that press conference or event or whatever it was going to be has been canceled, and his signing is not imminent. So that situation's ongoing. He was on TV yesterday talking like he would be an Arkansas Razorback. And my personal opinion as far as Alex Collins is that he's the type of kid that he wants to see something else. He's a different kind of kid. He's a male cheerleader. He played lacrosse. He's not your typical South Florida kid. He's a little more global. I compare him to Ricky Williams. He's got a real global perspective, and I think he does want to see something else. There's a struggle here between his mom, his family who wants him at Miami, and his coach who denies steering him anywhere. But pretty common knowledge that he has a relationship with Coach Partridge at Arkansas and a few of the other coaches under Coach Belema's staff. So there's a struggle there, but I do think ultimately that the kid actually wants to go to Arkansas, and that's what's going to win out at the end of the day.
Wow. Danny, much has been said about Ray Lewis Sr. as far as winning that ring with the Baltimore Ravens. Everybody knows and understands that Ray III is signed with the University of Miami, which he should have, and I'm pulling for the kid. He's smallish. I mean, he's 5'9", 190. Everybody thinks he's going to be a linebacker. But he's an athlete. He can play both offense and defense. Where will he end up ultimately? And don't think I'm crazy, but I know he's only 5'9". But if he beefs up and gets on that plan there at Miami, could he grow up to be a London Fletcher type player? 5'9", 225 pounds maybe at one time?
Well, it's funny. When Ray Lewis got to Miami, he was considered smallish. And when he entered the draft, he was considered smallish. He's a guy that's kept growing. He's obviously a weight room fanatic. And he's one of these rangy guys, big hands, long arms, kind of those indicators of growth. And his son, even though on a smaller frame, has some of that same body type. Now, he's going to come in probably as a cornerback or a slot receiver, but no one knows how these kids are going to develop. That's why recruiting is so interesting, and he may continue to grow. And who knows? Maybe he will become sort of a smallish linebacker. He's definitely physical. He was physical in high school. I think right now the projection is either cornerback or slot receiver, just because he's so quick. That's really his best attribute, is his foot quickness. He's probably quicker than his dad, just as far as making people miss. So I think that's really what his skill set is now. But 3 years, 4 years down the road, who knows? He's definitely got the right guy in his ear as far as hitting the weight room.
Danny Money, CanesInSight.com, the best in the business. I keep telling my Canes fans, friends, look, if you're depressed about the way yesterday ended, just go back to guys that have been committed for a long time. You got essentially a starting quarterback in the waiting there with Olsen. You mentioned Artie Burns, Carter as well, Mohammed, which signed yesterday as well from New Jersey, a great defensive end. Miami got some guys. They got, I think, a total of 17 guys. They got some good ones. Just unfortunately didn't close the way they wanted. They ended up getting Stacey Coley, which to me, maybe the best player of this entire recruiting class.
Hey, Adam,
yep.
Danny, let me ask you something real quick before we let you go. Any truth to the rumor that Mario Cristobal might be heading to the Cleveland Browns?
There's some buzz about it. He when he signed, he mentioned that he was turning down NFL offers to come to Miami because he cared that much about Miami. So I don't see what would have changed necessarily, but there's some buzz out there, and there's obviously a connection between Chudzinski and Cristobal, both as players on Miami and then during their coaching career. So I wouldn't say it's not possible, but the word when he took the job was that was an option, and he still took the job. So we'll see.
Hey, Danny, as always, appreciate your time, my friend. We'll talk to you next week. Take care, buddy.
Take care, guys.
Danny Money, CanesInsight.com. Coming up next, we'll turn our attention to Tallahassee. Ira Schofel, the Tallahassee Democrat, will join us next. We'll talk Florida State football here on the Sports Fix.